Oh my. Oh my. I'm sorry. You caught me thinking about the Young Republic video here, and I thought to myself, why was the United States of America during our Young Republic days so complicated, as Avril Lavigne would say? Yes, Hulk Hogan, as you see in the background over here, could have made it all united if he were around back then, but of course the mighty Hulk Hogan is not. But instead, we're divided peoples when we are looking at the Young Republic. So let's start by looking at some of the ways in which people were divided during the Young Republic, leading to that momentous Civil War that's coming up next. One of the first ways that America was divided right after the constitutional period was with looking at tariffs. Tariffs were a major factor in terms of the division between the northern part of the United States and the southern part of the United States. Tariffs, of course, as you know, are taxes on imports and exports. Super important in the early foundation because the regions are going to be divided about their love of taxes or their hatred of taxes when it came to imports. So before we go ahead and get started here, let's look at who liked the tariffs. The industrial North really liked protective tariffs, high protective tariffs. Why? Because that's where a lot of the business was. That's where a lot of the manufacturing was going on at this time. And so they wanted high protective tariffs to protect American businesses. That was the big idea. Protect American businesses by making foreign goods more expensive, as you see right over here. If foreign goods were more expensive, people would buy more U.S. goods, and the North became much more profitable over that. So the North loved their high protective tariffs. And again, this protected northern manufacturers from foreign competition. Now, who did not like those tariffs? The remaining region of the country, which would be the South. The agricultural South opposed high protective tariffs. They opposed high protective tariffs because, as you can see here, foreign goods were more expensive. People would buy more people would buy more U.S. goods. So what's the problem with the agricultural South with that? Right over here. The southern states would be victims of retaliatory tariffs by European countries and would also be subject to paying more goods as more money for goods as a result. So that was a very bad thing for the South. That was a major division between the industrial North and the agricultural South almost right from the start. All right, so with the tariffs over here, you can see how the tariffs work. We've kind of talked about it already, but here you can see how it works over here. The British-made cloth in this area costs $4 a roll. If the United States puts a 25% tariff, meaning it's an extra dollar, that would make the British cloth $1 in America. The American cloth would be $4 in America. Now, what would you then do? If you were an American, you would buy more American goods. Like Hulk Hogan here says in the back, buy more American goods. So you can see the northern states, which were the ones that were doing it, the green, they're the ones who were in favor of the tariffs, making the things. They were all for those protective tariffs. But the southern states, the red, they were against the tariff because they were really worried about the retaliatory tariffs affecting cotton, and they're also very worried about the price of goods just going up in general, because now you got to buy a $4 piece of cloth as opposed to a $5 piece of cloth. So those are your tariffs. Very important are those tariffs. Now, political parties started to develop at this time already. Here's this neat chart where you can see that there's this idea of parties in America from almost the very beginning. We're not talking about hip parties, which you may go to on the weekends. No, we're talking about political parties. Political parties led to some of the division in America from the very start. The very first political party we're going to talk about is the Federalist Party. The Federalist Party, you may remember from Constitution Clause talking to you about it, the Federalist Party came out of the United States Constitution. They favored a very strong national government, and they also favored an industrial economy. So you may then guess to yourselves, well then, would the North be a strong point for Federalists? And you are correct. The North would be a very big stronghold for the Federalist Party. The two main men behind the Federalist Party, the two main actors, Alexander Hamilton and John Adams. They were the two main people in the Federalist Party, Hamilton and Adams. On the flip side, we have the Democratic Republican Party. Now, you might be willing to say, well, wait a second, Mr. Swain, doesn't that mean that the Anti-Federalists then morphed into the Democratic Republicans? And that's actually not true. So don't make that assumption. That's actually a faulty assumption. The Democratic Republican Party, favored a weak national government. They also favored an American economy that was based on agriculture. Their two leaders, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. Now remember, James Madison was a Federalist during the Constitution debates, but is now a Democratic Republican during this time. So got to keep those in check. Now, for the most part, the first two presidential elections were won by the Federalists. The election of 1800 was a very, very important election between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Here you see Thomas Jefferson over here. Here you see John Adams over here. John Adams, you can see, is a Federalist. Thomas Jefferson is a Democratic Republican. What's so important about this election? The election was won by Jefferson, and it marked the very first peaceful transfer of power in American history. Before this time period, it was pretty much Federalist George Washington, Federalist John Adams, and now we have a switch of Federalist Thomas Jefferson. So that's a major turning point in our history where in a lot of other countries there'd be war or other types of violence with one party not wanting to leave power. But in America, Thomas Jefferson took power, John Adams gave it up peacefully. Now, John Marshall is also a man who's going to create a little bit of division in America. John Marshall was not our first Chief Justice, but our first super important Chief Justice. John Marshall's rulings, by and large, did one thing. They made the national government stronger than the state governments. So, what was the first major effect that John Marshall had? Well, Marbury versus Madison, which established the idea of judicial review. This means that the Supreme Court is the branch of the government that decides if laws are constitutional or not. They are the supreme law of the land. It said, as I mentioned, the federal courts could declare laws unconstitutional. And it also established the foundation that the Supreme Court would mediate between the branches of government. That if the executive branch and legislative branch were having a disagreement, maybe the legislative branch passed a law that the executive branch did not like, the federal government would be the mediator to say if that law was allowed or not. So that was super important as well. Another big Supreme Court case, the case of McCulloch versus Maryland. And this established the idea, as you can see here, that states are not allowed to tax the federal government. That was the major issue decided in McCulloch versus Maryland. Can the state tax agencies of the federal government? No is the answer to the question. McCulloch versus Maryland established the idea that the Supreme Court has implied powers, meaning that it's not everything's black and white in the Constitution, that you have to look through and find words in there that you can use to your advantage to say, hey, this is what was meant. It might actually not be written out, but this is what was meant. This also established the doctrine that the Supreme Court would mediate levels of government as well, so that if the states' governments and the federal governments were having an issue, that the Supreme Court would mediate those as well, which was another super important decision by John Marshall and McCulloch versus Maryland. The next one, Gibbons v. Ogden. Gibbons v. Ogden basically said that the federal government is in charge of economic affairs. The federal government is allowed to decide between what's going to happen with the trade between the states, that the national government is the one who gets to mediate the business interests, competing business interests. It might be states in business, it might be business in business, but it sets the idea that the Supreme Court is the mediator between competing business interests. Now, all this is just a nice way of saying the following thing. The national government gained a lot of power under John Marshall. That is John Marshall's lasting legacy, is that he got a lot of power from the national government through his Supreme Court decisions. All right, also getting a lot of power at this time is the United States in terms of expansion. Look at this nice map of American expansion that occurs after the Constitution is ratified. Look, here you have the original 13 colonies. Then once the United States gets its independence from the evil British during the American Revolution, their territory goes up to this Mississippi River over here. Then, of course, you have the Louisiana Purchase over here. Then you have the Texas War for Independence, and later on the Mexican-American War over here. And then you have the Oregon Treaty Territory. So in just about 50 short years, America is going to go from all the way over here at the Mississippi River all the way to the Pacific Ocean. That's going to be a phrase called manifest destiny. So the very first purchase, and number 7 on your review sheet, is the Louisiana Purchase. Louisiana Purchase here in this beautiful neon green doubled the size of the United States. We got it from France. Napoleon was the one who gave us the Louisiana Purchase. The United States wanted Louisiana Purchase because the Mississippi River was a major waterway that Thomas Jefferson and the United States wants to use for trade into the interior of the country. So Louisiana Purchase, super important. The Monroe Doctrine was then established after Thomas Jefferson left office, and then James Madison was president, and then James Monroe came into power. James Monroe stated the following in his Monroe Doctrine, that the American continent should not be considered open to future European colonializations. This was a hemisphere that was off limits to Europe being able to colonize it, that it was our territory, our area, and we would do something with it. Nations in Western Europe, republic, were different from those in Europe. They were monarchies. So we did not want monarchies having influences in the Western Hemisphere. It also said that the U.S. would intervene if Europe attempted future colonization in the United States, and we would not interfere with Europe. The idea here is, folks, the very famous commercial, Lego My Ego. The United States government said, this is our ego, you Lego our ego, and we will not Lego your ego over there. So you stay in your hemisphere, we're going to stay in our hemisphere, and we will never meet, and that will be great for the United States. So that's the Monroe Doctrine, dating all the way back to James Monroe as President of the United States in 1823. Jumping back one, you have the War of 1812, which was occurring under the presidency of James Madison. James Madison was the first president to be in war and to ask for a war declaration. The War of 1812 was really caused by British interference with American shipping and westward expansion. The idea here is that James Madison was sick and tired of the British seizing our ships as well as impressing our sailors. We did not want the British to be doing that anymore, and we went to war with the British over that. Now, it's not really going to be America's finest hour at this point in time, because the Americans will lose a couple big battles, and not to mention our capital is going to be burnt down as well, which is kind of embarrassing. But we do get the Star-Spangled Banner out of it, and we do get our American sailors not impressed anymore, and that's good. So that worked out very well. All right, number 10 you'll see there is the American Oregon Territory. This territory right over here in this beautiful deep purple, maybe they call it like a heather or something, was in dispute between the United States and Great Britain. The United States believed that we should have the territory go all the way up past Vancouver in Canada today, and the British said, no, that's our territory, yours should be a little bit less. We were going to go to war over it with Great Britain for a third time, and many people in America wanted to go to war, and they had a very neat rally cry called 5440 or fight, 5440 or fight. Well, there was no fight and there's no 54. Instead, there was a peace treaty that was set up with the 49th parallel. The 49th parallel will eventually be set up. You'll also see, as a result, the American victory during the War of 1812, that we would start to move towards Florida and would later on acquire this territory from the Spanish with the Adams-Onis Treaty. All right, question number 11 deals with the Federalist Party and their opposition to James Madison. The Federalists did not want anything to do with the War of 1812. Even though sailors were getting impressed, they thought that if we went to war with Great Britain, we would have major issues getting our goods in and getting our goods out. So they were very, very opposed to Madison's war resolution. So opposed that they want to set up something called the Hartford Convention, which would actually secede. They would have, New England states would have seceded from the United States of America. So talking about secession even before the Civil War. So that's very interesting. The Federalist Party, as a result of their not really being popular because of their opposition to Madison's war, would eventually die out. And they would be replaced by two political parties that were called the Whigs and the Know-Nothings. The Whigs and the Know-Nothings were the party that would replace the Federalist Party. All right. Coming up next is the age of Jackson. The age of Andrew Jackson is what we are going to be talking about here. Andrew Jackson was a guy who really transformed not only the American presidency, but also America as well. And we're going to look at why momentarily here. Andrew Jackson used what he called the spoils system, where he provided government jobs to people who supported him. The idea was, you support me, I give you a job. You support me in the election, and I will give you a job after I am victorious. That's why Andrew Jackson is riding this pig here, and it says, "To the victor goes the spoils." And the spoils were the government jobs, where the president got to hire and fire anybody he wanted. The spoils system would be around for many, many years, and would eventually be used to change the civil service system, which is some of what your parents get their jobs today, not based on what you know, but who you know is the spoil system. Getting a job based on who you know and not what you know, of course, is what we have today. All right. At this time, Andrew Jackson also eliminated property qualifications. Prior to this time, you could only be a voting male if you owned property. So that means many people were not able to vote before Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is benefited from these people called the common man, where you have these people who will be able to vote even though they don't own land. And that's a super, super important concept, because now the American Constitution is being expanded to we the people, as in we everybody, not just we the land-owning white men, but instead we the people. Still only white people at this point in time, and only men, of course, too. Sorry, ladies. But Andrew Jackson was so popular with the common man that when they got to vote, because the property qualifications ended, they voted for Andrew Jackson. One of the not-so-good sides of Andrew Jackson was, of course, his forced movement of the Native American tribe known as the Cherokees. The Cherokees were forced to march from Georgia to Oklahoma. Interestingly enough, John Marshall, our old friend from before, told Andrew Jackson he was not able to do it. Andrew Jackson said, "Mr. Marshall has made his ruling, now let him enforce it." And Andrew Jackson, of course, pushed the Native Americans from Georgia to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears, one of the sad chapters in American society where these people were forced, and there's also deaths on the trail as well. Another one of Andrew Jackson's enemies besides Native Americans was the Bank of the United States. Andrew Jackson believed the bank was corrupt and only for super rich people and helping super rich people. Andrew Jackson used his veto power to end the Bank of the United States by saying, the bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it. He called it the Hydra-headed monster, is what Andrew Jackson called the Bank of the United States. Eventually, the bank will be killed by Jackson. He'll veto its recharter, take all the money out, and the bank will be dead. And again, Jackson did this to help what he believed was the common man. And he saw it again as a tool of the rich. The bank was a tool of the rich. Question number 16 is next. South Carolina also became an enemy of Andrew Jackson as well and created more division in the United States when South Carolina threatened to nullify the Tariff of 1832. Nullify, of course, means that you are going to not follow those laws. So South Carolina threatened to not follow the Tariff of 1832. Andrew Jackson said, okay, well, I'm President of the United States. You have to follow this law. And I am going to send federal troops in there to collect those monies if you don't collect the money. It was very close to a civil war before there was a civil war of the United States. And so the South Carolina tariff was nullified for a short time, but then eventually South Carolina would agree to follow the laws if it was lowered a little bit, which eventually it was. And then Jackson, of course, did not have to send the troops in, but it was an awfully close call. Manifest destiny is the idea in America that we are going to go from coast to coast, that it is manifest, it is obvious. Any moron, any bozo can see that the United States is going to go from one area of the coast to another area of the coast, from sea to shining sea. That was manifest destiny. And many American presidents before this time period were controlling the lands and making the lands more under the control of the American government at this time to expand that territory. So manifest destiny, here you see manifest destiny again. There you see this woman who is the progress of time clearing people out over here. You have the trains, you have the telegraph wires, clearing out Native Americans. There you have some settlers and bringing the light of civilization to the West Coast. And again, manifest destiny was the belief that America would expand from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific. Question number 18. Part of the manifest destiny of America was its migration to Texas. Mexico encouraged some Americans to move to Texas. Americans did move to Texas, and then Mexico did not like the fact that Americans were not following the rules of Mexico in Texas. So as a result, the American Revolution of Texas, really the Texas Revolution, I guess would be a better way of saying it, the Texas Revolution occurred in Mexico. That's, of course, the world famous Remember the Alamo. Remember the Alamo happens not during the Mexican-American War, but the Texas War for Independence. The most famous battle was the Battle of the Alamo, which the Texans fought to the very last man. The Tejanos fought to the very, very last man. Texas would be its own independent state for a little while, and then they would eventually become part of the United States, which would anger Mexico, and then we would go to war with Mexico over the borders of Texas. There is a major border dispute between Texas and the United States. Texas believed their land went further. Mexico believed no, their land went further. And that would eventually lead to the Mexican-American War, which lasted from 1846 until 1848. In addition to formally ending Mexico's ties towards Texas, it also added all of this area over here, what is called a New Mexico. Of course, today we know it as California, Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, all those areas over there. So that was the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The Treaty of Guadalupe, I think I just said Tweety. The treaty, not Tweety, this is not Twitter. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican-American War. And that is question number 19. Gave the United States an enormous amount of land, as I mentioned already. All right, question number 20 is going to deal with a very sad chapter in American society again, slavery and abolition. William Lloyd Garrison was a major anti-slavery proponent at this point in time, and he wrote a newspaper called The Liberator. It was around this time, the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, where people really start to become much more anti-slavery and more what we would know as abolitionists. William Lloyd Garrison is one of those men who is spreading the word that slavery is wrong in his paper, The Liberator. He viewed slavery as a violation of Christian principles and argued for its abolition. He believed that America was going the wrong way, not from just a ethical standpoint as well, but also a religious standpoint as well, and that we would fear God's wrath if we did not get rid of slavery. So, also during this time period, the abolition movement started to raise the slave revolts in places like Virginia, for example, by Nat Turner and Gabriel Prosser, who were feeding into the Southerners' fears that the slaves were getting all riled up because of these dastardly northern abolitionists who were just trying to anger the slaves and make them revolt. And there was the belief that these slave revolts were eventually going to turn very, very violent and very, very harmful towards the civilized white aristocracy in the South. And so as a result of these slave revolts and as a result of this increased abolition, many Southerners began to treat their slaves much, much harsher in the South. There were a series of harsh laws in the South that went against fugitive slaves. It also said that you could not read to your slave or teach your slave how to read or write. So the slave revolts, which tried, of course, to end slavery, actually led to much harsher treatment towards the slaves at this time. There were some slavery compromises which made our relationship, as we go back to it, more complicated between the North and the South. A couple slavery compromises you should be aware of. The Missouri Compromise. The Missouri Compromise, which is right over here, it drew an east-west line, the 36-30 line, which said that if the United States were to add more territory, all territory north of that line would be free, and all territory south of that line would be slave. That was the Missouri Compromise line. Slavery would be prohibited above the line and allowed below, with the exception of Mississippi. Also, as a result of the Missouri Compromise, Maine comes into the United States as a free state. Okay. Question number 23 deals with the Compromise of 1850. This comes about because of the Mexican-American War. California, because of gold, is going to be populated very, very quickly after the Mexican-American War. So California will come into the United States as a free state as a result of the Compromise of 1850, and also put popular sovereignty into new territories and increased the fugitive slave acts, fugitive slave laws. It passed much, much stricter, much, much harsher fugitive slave laws in the United States of America. Question number 24 is going to deal with the KansasNebraska Act, which repeals the Missouri Compromise. What happens is the Southerners realize that they're not getting as much territory as they thought they were going to get, so instead the Missouri Compromise is repealed by the KansasNebraska Act. The KansasNebraska Act takes the idea that residents of the territory should decide if they want slavery to be in their territory or not, and it's called popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty, the people would vote if they wanted slavery in their territory or not. And that sounds all great, wonderful, and perfect, except that it's not going to be when there is a series of arguments that occur over it. Kansas-Nebraska Act is going to lead to the bloody fighting in Kansas between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces called Bleeding Kansas. There you see John Brown leading some men in the quest to not have slavery in Kansas, Bleeding Kansas, as it was called. So it was very, very problematic. It also led to the birth of the Republican Party. The Republican Party was against the spread of slavery. They were not quite abolitionists. They weren't quite far down the road of ending slavery, but they certainly did not want the spread of slavery. And so that was the Republican Party, opposing the spread of slavery. Last question here is going to be number 26, and that's the women's rights movement. The women's rights movement also starts around this time period in the 1830s and 1840s, where women are increasingly demanding a say in the nation that they, in part, helped create. The women's rights movement gets its big message across in the Seneca Falls Declaration, which gave equal rights, demanded, rather I should say, equal rights for women. And they wrote, of course, the Declaration of Sentiments. The Declaration of Sentiments was written. It was basically the cut, copy, and paste of the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Sentiments said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." And their leader at the Seneca Falls Convention was the ever popular Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And that is the women's rights movement. Well, we had a lot of information in this little one, so I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned a lot. And I'm going to continue to go back now, look at my hero, Hulk Hogan here, and you guys have a phenomenal rest of your day, and be patriotic Americans like Hulk Hogan. See you guys later.